he just goes for a throw and he wins. Just lower this down first. There we are. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries. Welcome to the first WraithCast of 2023. My name is Barbara. You've joined me here in the Chamber of the Wraith, and I'm bringing back an old friend of mine, Judge, to talk about Judge Dredd. I read the Soviet Mega Block 1 war arc in a huge honkin' Judge Dredd thing that I got at the library, which, by the way, all y'all motherfuckers need to go to a library. For real. Libraries are cool. So, yeah. So I read that, and I got inspired about Judge Dredd. And then, recently, Judge Anon mentioned that, hey, wait a minute here. There's some new Judge stuff that's been coming out that's apparently really good. So that inspired me to think, okay, why don't we talk about some of the more bonkers shit when it comes to Judge Dredd? Just Judge Dredd stuff in general, because this series gets fucking weird. And that's what we're going to be doing today. At least as I'm recording this. When I upload it, it'll probably be within a couple of days. But, anywho, don't forget to be awesome, my friends. And let's talk Judge Dredd. And 3, 2, 1... And he's here!
Hello, everyone.
My favorite Argentine individual here to talk about fucking Judge Dredd.
You don't know what you got yourself into, pal.
That's why I set myself a little bit of time. Alright, so I set aside a little bit of what I'm calling DreddCast notes because I love fun names like that. And we're taking a look at... First we're doing the history, the background, the development of Judge Dredd, you know, some of the real world stuff, and then part of that is going to be the global angle, because if I'm not mistaken, Judge Dredd is a British comic, right?
Right, from 1977.
Yeah, so, right, huh. Fun fact, that is also when the last guillotine execution was. That's besides the point. And, you know, with the British wave, the British invasion, blah-de-blah-de-blah, you know, the Beatles and all that, America loves to get their hands on British stuff. I mean, Beatles, The Office, all of that stuff. So how did Dredd fare in America compared to Britain and any other international territories? Because a good example of, like, why this is worth noting is that with Mortal Kombat and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 specifically, South America is nuts for UMK3. So that game still has a competitive scene on the continent, which is super cool. Then we were talking about the lore. We actually get to dive into the world and talk about Dredd and Mega City 1 and what the hell happened that led to this situation, including what I like to call the weird shit. You know what the weird shit is. Everything from psychics to alternate dimensions to some of the most comical jail sentences you will ever hear in a comic book.
And if you don't know what the weird shit is, you're about to find out.
Yes.
You're gonna learn today.
Oh, yes. Then we have adaptations, you know, movies, crossovers, any other notable things that might have happened. I don't know, did Judge Dredd ever cross over with Archie? The Predator did, so... and then we'll talk about some of the big stories, like the Mega Block War, for lack of a better name, or Judge Death, or anything like that. And of course, we're going to be closing out with, what's Dredd doing now? Because you made a post about a modern Dredd comic involving a hot dog, and I'm just like, I gotta know what the fuck's going on here. So, that's what inspired this whole cast. So, talk to me about the background and development of Judge Dredd.
You got some good bones there, so let's put some meat in them. First of all, as I mentioned before, Judge Dredd started in 1977, but sort of the seeds of Dredd were planted about early on in the decade. Because you gotta see that England and the United Kingdom and the world in general, Western world in general, in the 70s, was going through sort of the backlash to the kind of countercultural social progressivism of the 60s. So there was a lot of attempts from sort of conservative groups and politicians to start sort of seeing things as sort of all these evil things that were coming out of the 60s. And in particular, what happened in the 70s in the UK was a sort of perceived increase in lawlessness, in violent crime, in violent people. They had the same thing that happened in the States with the cities becoming, battlegrounds and no man's land where gangs roamed and stabbed everyone, and it was all presented like that. And of course, how real all that and how much of that was just perceived or exaggerated is a matter of debate. But the point is that there was a constant call from politicians for what people in that time and nowadays call the politics of law and order. It was about we need to give our policemen more powers to be able to bring back law and order and respect for the law in these hellholes that we have right now that are called cities. Which, of course, was, generally just a cover for a lot of racism and classism and other isms. But that was one part. That was sort of the homegrown part of it. And the other part of it was an import of North American characters and mindsets that can be summed up with two words, which are Dirty Harry. At the time, and that was, the American response to that kind of fear-mongering, that kind of growth of fear of lawlessness was, well, we need, these hard-ass, hard-boiled cops who don't care for the law, who go around just shooting criminals, who, cut through the red tape and all that. So that was sort of, some of the ingredients of all that. And in the midst of all this thing, what was happening in 70s comics in Britain was a sort of revolution that was coming up primarily from the comic book publisher IPC. IPC was putting out a couple of comic anthologies that were a lot grittier, a lot more violent, not necessarily more mature, but mature leaning. You gotta remember, every time I talk about these, you gotta remember that these are comics for kids 6 to 10-year-old. Like Judge Dredd started as a comic for kids.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta keep that in mind when I tell you that this was a time where, for example, a war comic showing a guy getting stabbed with a bayonet was considered too violent. I was like, no, that's too much for kids. But IPC had a comic that was doing exactly that, which was called Battle. And Battle was the most important writers from Battle, the creators of Battle, were an editor called Pat Mills, editor-writer, and a writer called John Wagner. And Mills, both of them were pretty rebellious guys. They were pretty young, sort of hungry and angry guys that really didn't like the way British comics were made back then. And they wanted to push the envelope and get a little more violent and get a little cooler in general. And of course, kids love that. Because comics up until that time had been mostly clean cut. There have been some changes. There were some comics that went a little bit further. But IPC was the first one where pretty much the entire line was just brutal violence and people getting murdered and, not like you'd see today. By the standards of the day, a lot of these things seem kind of quaint, but it was still a shock at that time. And the biggest shock was a second anthology that came after Battle, which was called Action. Action was, the theme of the anthology was just what the title said, action. And the fun part about Action is that a lot of the titles they had, a lot of the stories they had were what they called a dead crit, which was, let's say you are a strapping British love of around 6 years old, and you hear about this cool new movie from the States that's called Jaws. But you can't see Jaws because it's, whatever they call their PG-13 or their R-rated. It's got violence, it's got blood. You can never see it. You're never going to watch it. And this is the 70s, so there are no VHS tapes. There's no DVD. There's no way to watch it at home. So you can't see Jaws. But here's a comic book that has Hookjaw. And Hookjaw is a comic about a shark that eats people. So that's your Jaws. You can't see Dirty Harry, but you can see One-Eye. You can read One-Eye Jack, which is a comic about a hard-boiled cop in New York who only has one eye and a huge revolver. So a lot of these comics were versions of that, of things that were coming from the States that kids couldn't read or couldn't watch. And they got so violent, in fact, they got so nasty in some places that it called for censorship. A lot of parental groups and even a few government officials started calling to censor these violent, monstrous, abominable comics that were turning our kids into, gangsters. And eventually action did go a little bit too far. At one point, it ended up getting, a whole issue ended up getting pulped. And it came back and it had to be rejiggered into something a lot more tame. And that taught Pat Mills a very important lesson for his next comic, which was, if you want to get dirty, if you want to get violent and nasty, just make it sci-fi, because nobody gives a shit what happens in sci-fi. And that's what created 2000 AD. 2000 AD was the next project from Mills and Company, which was a sci-fi anthology that launched in 1977. And that's when, on issue 2 of 2000 AD, Judge Dredd debuted. And Judge Dredd is important because remember how we were talking about Dirty Harry and how this kind of cowboy cops, this idea of, well, what we need is to have cops just to have these summary powers to just judge people on the spot.
Well, you now have a literal judge, jury, and executioner type.
Exactly. Judge Dredd is, what if instead of one Dirty Harry, you had an entire police force of Dirty Harrys? What if summary powers of execution were institutionalized? What if that was just the law? It wasn't just, these cops are out of control and loose cannons. It's like, no, that's just procedure. Showing up and blasting a creep in the face and letting him to die on the street, that's just procedure now. So Dredd is built on that. It's an exaggeration of Dirty Harry and an exaggeration of America in general. And that's more or less how it started.
Interesting. So this whole needing the police to have more power, which not a very popular stance these days, but back almost 50 years ago, yeah, he's like 45 now, isn't he? So wowzers. But back in
you gotta remember that, you read back on those times and you see people who are like angry that policemen now have to say the criminals' rights before arresting them. There was always this idea that these kind of laws were, shackling our brave policemen and not allowing them to do their jobs right. And it was all red tape, and things like Dirty Harry were a response to that. It was, this is the kind of cops we need, or the kind of exaggeration of that idea. And Dredd takes it, 10 steps further.
Yeah. Well, no fucking kidding. I did read some Dredd and I was like, oh my goodness, that is a lot. But
yeah.
But that leads to the next angle, the global angle. Seeing as Dredd was born of this sort of second-hand Americana that Britain was going through, how well did Dredd do in America? And how well did he do in other territories? Like, I can't say how well he did in Canada, because I'd never really heard of Judge Dredd until relatively recently, but, other territories like that. How well do you, that you are aware of, that Judge Dredd did in America, from being effectively a second-hand futuristic Dirty Harry from Britain?
Not very well, unfortunately. there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, there's a very obvious material reason, like a very practical reason, which is that you couldn't get 2000 AD in the States. It's still kind of hard to get it. Back then, it was impossible. You had to have either someone who already lived there and could send them back to you, or you had to go to a comic shop. And remember, this was the very early days of comic shops. This was specialty shops being a very rare thing, and you need to find one that had contacts in the UK. Now, things got a little better once a group of DC editors went to the UK and came back with Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, and Alan Moore. And Bolland in particular had drawn a bunch of Dreads. So once Bolland started hitting it big in the US, the IPC at the time and people who owned Dredd were like, well, okay, we can work with this. And they started reprinting a lot of old Dredd stories in the US with new Bolland covers. And there are a lot of these. They're all like beautiful covers, excellent. And that's how a lot of people in the States first found out about Dredd. But it was still hard to find like that extra. It was still hard to. You couldn't read it weekly, because remember, this is a weekly anthology, 2080 to this day. And on top, there was also like it was a black and white comic. The reprints had to color them, and the colorings are a bit dubious in about a few places. Kind of awkward, but it was like the first try, and then the second try came around in the 90s. And this is where we start going into the adaptations part as well.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine why.
Mm-hmm.
Around the same time as the movie was about to come out, because remember, Dredd the movie, as much as a lot of people, and I get the point, that say like, well, Stallone's Dredd, oh yeah, that's from the 80s, that's an 80s movie, it's from 1995. Like, that's really old for what it looks like. But anyway, that's when also something important happened, which is that DC, who had already had good relationships with IPC and 2000 AD, that's when John Wagner, who was Dredd's creator, and Alan Grant, who had joined Wagner writing Dredd for most of its golden age in the 80s, were both working for DC.
Oh.
And yeah, we had that, and we had the other name at the time, who was Simon Bisley. And Simon Bisley, around that time, was a superstar, like biggest name in comics, off of his time in another 2000 AD comic, which was called Slain. And what he had done was make that comic. He had fully painted that comic. That was completely painted. It wasn't, pencil and ink. It was all paintings, and it blew everyone's mind off. It was just complete instant superstardom for the guy.
Did Alex Ross also do painting for his for his legendary art?
Yeah, Alex Ross still does painting. He does that kind of oil painting. Bisley came earlier. Bisley was doing that in like the late 80s. It was a huge deal. And what they did was, okay, we have these people, and we want Bisley to do something for us. He's already done Lobo for us. And what can we do? And that came to what I call the second likely place where a lot of Americans found out about Dredd, which was the Batman Judge Dredd Judgment in Gotham crossover.
Yep.
That was, Wagner, Grant, Bisley, and that's a classic. It's wild stuff, and I can imagine someone who has never read about Dredd finding out about that crossover. And around that time, IPC also struck a deal with DC to use them as a sort of American publishing arm for their comics. So DC reprinted a couple of old 2000 AD stuff, mostly Alan Moore, mostly, known names. And also what they did was make their own Judge Dredd comics. Instead of just taking what was made in the UK and printing it back with a little more color, what they did was start their own Dredd series. And that went not too well. It's a whole new continuity. It's American creators. It's all right, but it didn't last long, and neither did their deal. And then the Stallone movie tanked, and basically no one wanted to hear about Red for a while longer.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons. That's more or less like the practical reasons. There have been other ways. Most recently, 2000 AD, now owned by Rebellion, the video game company. Now most recently, they made a deal with IDW to license Dredd, and that also went kind of hit or miss. And now, mostly nowadays, they just publish themselves.
Right.
Now that it's much easier to find books and to get them shipped, and also you got digital to help you, so it's easier than ever instead of being to just read 2000 AD in the States. But I think that's more or less like the practical problems are a big reason why Dredd never quite hit it in the United States. But then there are the more interesting sort of ideological problems. Like, one of the things that a lot of people say is that Dredd for the Americans doesn't work because what the British consider an exaggeration, the Americans just see as business as usual. Like, a British would say, oh man, look at this incredible weird labyrinth of roads and highways and loops, and nothing looks like it makes sense, and it's so outrageous and over the top. And then an American will say, oh yeah, that's I-15 coming out of, Pasadena. Yeah, I drive over there every time I go to work.
So the concept of Mega City 1 was not so alien to the Americans that it didn't quite capture that whimsy, as it were, right?
Exactly. That's one of the reasons that people say, which is that the parts that are exaggerated just don't hit the same, and the parts that are outrageous just seem kind of ludicrous, weird. But I think the other reason, the main reason to me, and the one I've seen a lot, is that Americans in general like to have a hero and someone to root for. They want to say, oh yeah, this guy may be an asshole and he may be kind of a bastard, but he's hunting bigger bastards, and he still cares about the innocents, and he's still deep down inside, a nice guy. So I can root for him.
Dredd is not that.
Yeah. Dredd is. If you're rooting for Dredd, you should look yourself in the mirror, pal.
Indeed.
So I've seen a lot of readers who are like, yeah, I tried Judge Dredd, but I'm just standing here going, am I supposed to like this guy? Am I supposed to enjoy him? I'm not really getting it. So it's hard when you don't have a character who's immediately like, even if it's a villain, someone who you can be like, yeah, I want this guy to succeed and to be a hero. And Dredd doesn't have that.
That's actually that was actually when I was reading Dredd. That's one of the big things that had me irked for a little while. It's just like, I know he's the main character, but man, they really don't make this guy likable. Then Judge Anderson shows up, and I'm like, ooh, hot lady, I'm in.
Yeah, and Anderson is great because she's much more of a hero. He's much more heroic and likable figure in general than Dredd.
Plus, she's a psychic, and who doesn't like a good psychic?
Oh boy, who doesn't love it? Who doesn't like Debbie Harry if she was a leather-wearing, motorcycle-riding psychic cop?
Can't beat that. So it seems like practicality and the juxtaposition between the main character also being like the kind of person where you're like, well, I can't root for this guy, but it seems like I'm supposed to. So I guess American confusion about Dredd?
Yeah, sort of like, maybe not a confusion, but it's hard to grasp.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's just like a purely American thing. I'm not gonna say, oh, these goofy Americans, they can handle a little bit of moral grayness, because no.
I mean, I'm Canadian, and it threw me for a loop.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of people, and that's sort of why I don't think Dredd really hit it big anywhere. There are some exceptions. For example, I know Brazil loves Dredd in general, but that's mostly because they also love Beasley. So they found out about Dredd via Beasley. So they like that kind of heavy metal, hardcore, beating up dudes sort of Dredd.
Ah.
And other countries just prefer more. They don't like Dredd so much as they like the artists that work with him. It's like I don't much care about Dredd, but I love Bolland, so let me get a book of Bolland Dredd stuff.
Yes. So, and kind of treat it as just like a, ooh, pretty pictures sort of thing.
And the pictures are very pretty, like beautiful.
Yeah. That's one thing. That's one thing I've seen. Like, I was a little bit hesitant because, oh, it's a black and white comic. I'm not sure how well it's going to look without colors. And I open it, I'm like, okay, yeah. Just goes to show that color is the icing.
And also, something beautiful about Dredd in general is that he had a mix of British artists who were coming from wildly different styles, and then a couple of European artists. Like his creator, his original artist, Carlos Esquerra, is a Spanish man. Was a Spanish man. He's sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And that guy drew like nobody else. He had a style that was completely of his own. And everyone else had a style of their own as well. So what's fun about Dredd is that it's terrible for people who want like one art style. But if you read it all at once, you get this sort of artist jam feeling where nobody draws him exactly the same and everyone adds a couple of details here and there, and then the next artist looks and say, oh, I like that, let me put that in my style, and slowly you see how everyone sort of agrees on one design, even though the design is already like 90% complete off the bat because Scala was a monster. But it's great to see how everyone has a different style, but everyone also agrees on a few things.
Yeah.
And it's wild to jump from someone like Brian Bolland to someone like Mick McMahon.
Kind of like
sometimes on the very next episode.
Yeah. Kind of makes me think of almost an artist alley or like an art contest thing, but everybody's collaborative, so as things progress you see how things change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard if you're going in expecting something solid, and also because some of the styles are very weird. But once you get into the groove, it becomes part of the appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust me. With the art was the big draw, and then some of the bigger shifts. I think it was in Volume 5 where the Mega Block War was. I think.
Yeah, that's Blockmania and Apocalypse War.
Yeah.
And Apocalypse War is, for example, Apocalypse War is pure Esquerra. That's all him. All 25 episodes are him.
Yeah.
But in Blockmania, you start with Mick McMahon.
Yeah.
Then you go to, I think, Ron Smith. And then you go to Bolland. And it's just the wildest shifts in any.
And then who did Return of Judge Death? Because he was in there too.
That's Bolland.
Okay. Okay, I was wondering about that because I do remember seeing at least something of an artistic shift somewhere in that collection, and it turns out it was actually in the earlier Blockmania.
Yeah, and Blockmania just has like 3 different. No, it has 4 because I forgot that Steve Dillon did a couple of episodes of Blockmania as well. You know, from Preacher.
Cool. That's pretty sweet. Now, speaking on those things, Blockmania, Apocalypse War, and all of this, some people might be looking at that going, I'm sorry, what on earth are you talking about with these terminologies? I am completely lost. Well, it's time to take a deep dive at 2000 AD's Judge Dredd and take a look at the world of Mega City 1 and find out more about the lore.
Oh boy, the lore. The lore. The lore.
This is where things are going to get stupid.
Absolutely. Brilliantly so. But keep in mind that a lot of this only got codified around like 2004, 2005. Because for the longest time it was like, who cares about the lore? It's a kid's comic.
Yeah.
We don't need to think too hard about it. But around that time they said, okay, let's try to put everything together. And what they came out with was once upon a time, around late 90s within the world of Dredd and early 21st century, the world was already kind of slipping into chaos. was already like this push of, lawlessness and violence, and everything was going pretty badly. And around the middle of the century, mid-century more or less, the United States creates the Judges Corps, which is Justice Department, which was going to be a bunch of cops on bikes who were able to dispense instant justice to criminals. And they were going to be working alongside the regular police. And it worked for a while. It managed to more or less stem the tide until things got a little more hectic in the international front. And around, I'm going to say the 60s, 2060s, I will have to go back and check. There was a major nuclear war between all the big powerful factions of the world, and everything went to absolute shit. America was almost absolutely destroyed. The only parts of the country that weren't irradiated wastelands were along the coasts and a little bit of Texas. The rest of the world got pounded into basically oblivion. The Atlantic became an unswimmable wasteland called the Black Atlantic. Everything went absolutely to shit.
Yeah.
And the president of the United States got deposed, and the judges took over all legal and governmental powers. And the comic starts in 2099, exactly, and It stars Judge Dredd. Judge Dredd is a clone of the man who created Justice Department, a man called Judge Fargo. So he was literally born to be a judge and nothing but a judge. The rest of the cities that survived, all the places where humanity more or less survived, became mega cities, which are huge, massive expanses of city that, for example, in the East Coast go all the way from more or less the tip of Canada all the way to Miami. And then you have things like, here's the English city, or Brit said, here's the Australian megacity called Oz, and all these small megacities scattered throughout the globe, all of which have adopted the same Justice Department system from the United States. So the state of the world is that everything else that's not in the megacities is an irradiated wasteland populated by mutants and creeps and monsters and horrible unnatural disasters, and humanity survives on these closed down, super totalitarian government cities where life is cheap, crime is everywhere, and only the judges can prevent total anarchy. Or so they say.
You can say that again. So Dredd being a clone is admittedly a little bit news to me, but I do know about the other megacities via things like, again, Apocalypse War, where I believe the Mega Block City tries to demolish Megacity 1 and turn it into kind of an expansion effort to conquer Megacity 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Glorious East Meg 1, which is basically the way to say, hey, this is an 80s comic. I don't know if you realize yet.
Oh, there's a pause there.
So apart from that, there's also, other than that, there's not a lot of lore. Most of the lore you just see in the comic itself, because most of the comic are just one-shot small stories about like a day in the life of Dredd.
Right.
There's more, of course. There's a lot of things there, and you can see them more or less through the big stories. But the basic is that. The basic idea of Dredd is that the world is completely destroyed, and humanity only survives in these super locked up, tight cities where freedom is almost non-existent because they're all ruled by totalitarian super governments. And people live crammed in huge mega blocks. Massive buildings are like, many miles high and can host hundreds of thousands of people crammed together in tight spaces. Very few of them have jobs because most of the jobs are taken over by robots. So you create this idea, this atmosphere of people are bored, people's lives have lost all meaning, humanity is basically on life support, and so they become criminals, they become creeps, they become perps, they become just doing things for the sake of it, which is where a lot of the weird shit comes from.
Which is what we're getting into now. Because
Exactly.
because it's not just people being crammed into these things. I mean, one of the first things I read about were literal fucking aliens.
Yep. Yep.
Literal fucking aliens. Like, what?
Yep.
Oh god.
Again, 70s, 80s sci-fi comics just didn't give a shit, man.
Who gives
They
a
didn't
damn
give a
about
shit.
who gives a damn about consistency? Ugh.
Tone? What the hell is a tone? That's for, rock bands and jazz. This is a comic.
This is a comic. We're allowed to cut loose and do weird shit.
For example, if you read a little bit of Dredd from the early ones, you probably read one of my favorite parts of weird shit, which is the Undercity. That's the whole idea that when they built Mega City 1, they paved over old cities and then built the city on top of it. So there's a huge stretch of like New York and Boston and a lot of the cities just under the surface where a lot of darkness dwellers and weirdo people and mutants still live there. So it's basically like building our city on top of Escape from New York.
We're Snake
I love
Pillskin.
that. And I love it. I adore it. And of course, once they go down there, they found werewolves.
I'm sorry, werewolves?
There's a whole story called Cry of the Wolf about werewolves in the Undercity, and it's drawn by Steve Dillon, and it's beautiful.
Hold on. So we got aliens, we got werewolves. We got aliens, we got werewolves, we got interdimensional crazy murder judges, we've got psychics,
Vampires, robots.
I mean, if you got werewolves, you might as well have vampires, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's like a bingo.
Yeah. So how much crazy shit can we fit into one comic? Here you go. I mean,
And also, kind of the beauty of it is that you can have the weirdest stuff in the universe, and then you have Dredd, who is the ultimate straight man to all the weirdness. He's the guy who's gonna come in, he's gonna shoot everyone, and he's gonna put everyone in jail, shove them all into an isolation cube, and that's it. That's the story.
yeah.
So it's kind of like how a lot of people see Batman as a straight man to the weirdness and the insanity of all his villains, which is, I think that's the reason why Alan Grant and John Wagner did so well writing Batman, because they already had 10 plus years of experience writing Dredd. So Dredd is like that, but taken again to another extreme.
Yeah, it's like if you took Batman and the Punisher, cranked it up to 11, set him in front of werewolves, robots, and vampires, and just told him to shoot everything that moves.
Yeah, and also if you made that an institution, if you said these are no longer a vigilante, this is the norm.
Yes.
This is how it's gonna be.
The way you were
This is the law.
the way you were. Well, no wonder he is the law. That's why
I am the law.
That's part of why I was thinking, like, oh my god, could you imagine if Vampirella fucking crossed over with that shit? God, and then if you do the Mortal Kombat crossover, all of a sudden he's dealing with fire-breathing ninjas, and he's just playing it straight. Judge Dredd from Mortal Kombat 12.
I'll tell you about the little Just Dredd Mortal Kombat connection later.
Oh, this is gonna be. This'll be.
It's not a big deal,
Okay.
but there is a connection. There's a small connection.
I look forward to seeing that. But that is. So
now that we are knee deep into the weird shit, I think there's two kinds of weird shit in Dredd. there's a kind that comes from within the city, and then there's a kind that comes outside. It's like an external thing. And right in the middle, there are a couple that are more half and half. Within the city, you got what they call crazes, which is, again, people are locked up, basically trapped in their houses. None of them have jobs. Everyone's bored. Everyone's living on welfare, etc., etc. So what they do is they fill their time with sudden crazes where everyone goes insane. Sort of like what we would call going viral nowadays, or what would be a fashion show or something.
Yeah.
Everyone goes nuts, for example, for sky surfing, which is taking a hoverboard, and none of those like tiny little Back to the Future skateboards. No. A full-on surfing board that can also fly and start doing crazy stunts all over the city. And being chased by judges and shot down in the sky because, hey, whatever, life is just boring anyways. And then you have stuff like, well, you've seen Judge Dredd, so you've already seen Boing, the miracle plastic.
Boing the miracle plastic. There's the guy that makes the candy so sweet it's literally addictive. There's Blockmania. That I think Blockmania, though, that's just a thing where people just kind of snap.
Yeah, basically what happens is that people become territorial.
Yeah,
they're being trapped inside their apartments. So they're like, this is my apartment and I love it and I will kill you if you talk shit about it. So every now and then, neighboring city blocks just start shooting at each other, just start blasting each other up, and judges are like, "Oh, must be a Tuesday."
or in the case of Blockmania, it turns out, oh, some crazy dude is drugging the water supply.
Yeah, at the end they're like, "Oh, well, that makes sense." But yeah, in Blockmania, there's a moment of, "Hey, we always have block wars, but this is getting a little bit out of hand."
Yeah, it's like we're used to block wars, but this is twice as much as I was expecting. What the hell's going on here?
And then you have things like competitive staring contests, where people just stare at each other inside a stadium for 100,000 people viewing at home, and just try to stare each other to death. You have things like everyone has a hobby, so because of course you can't have a job, everyone just picks up something they want to do. So there's part of a story where one of the characters shown to have taken up dishwashing as a hobby. So they just do the dishes, then dirty them up, then do them again, then dirty them up again. And it's always just walking the line between hilariously absurd and just terrifyingly sad.
Yeah.
It's like, oh god.
And speaking of terrifying, let's talk about Judge Death for a minute. I've alluded to him. I alluded to him a couple of times, but he's in. You want to talk like people think the Batman Who Laughs is like kind of the ultimate in nihilism. No. Cenobite Joker can sit down. Judge Death knows what real craziness in that realm is like.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that is amazing because when I said that there are threats from the inside or from the outside, and then there's a tier of threats that are more or less in the middle, that's him. Judge Dredd is an interdimensional super fiend who comes from a parallel dimension where the judges of that world decided that since only the living commit crimes, that means that life itself is a crime. And he became an undead monster who can kill people with a touch and set off to kill everyone in his planet, along with 3 other dark judges, or kind of like riders of the horsemen of the apocalypse, but worse. And after killing everyone on their planet, they were like, "Oh man, there are other dimensions. We should go and kill all of them as well." And that rules.
Which is like when you describe what his motive is, which it absolutely is. Only the living can commit crimes. Thus, if we kill everybody, no crimes. That is what I was talking about with the ultimate nihilism. It's like, yeah, the Batman Who Laughs. Oh, it's a blend of Batman and the Joker. Oh, isn't he scary? No. Imagine going against something that believes your very existence is a crime and will kill you to make sure you are now a quote-unquote law-abiding corpse.
Yeah, and it works beautifully as well because general knowledge, common knowledge tells you that, okay, what's the best kind of villain for a hero? Well, the best kind of villain is someone who's like an inversion, who is like a perversion, or someone who is the complete opposite. You know, Batman is soul order, then the Joker has to be chaos. If Superman is kindness, then Luthor has to be selfishness, and all that stuff. Or they have to be someone who is like a perversion, like, oh, I saw your ideals and I turned them into something terrible for whatever reason. Judge Dredd works because he is an exaggeration of the exaggeration. He is the logical endpoint of where Dredd and his politics would eventually go.
Yeah.
Which is, we need more laws to commit more to fight crime, but there's always more crime and there's always more laws. Eventually we get to the point where what is the ultimate crime is being alive. And so you get this thing that comes from outside of Dredd's world, but it's also taking him, who is already a few steps forward, an extra step forward. It's another turn of the crank.
Yeah.
It's like this thing, this constant thing of, this is what you're going to become sooner or later.
Which is kind of nutty because you also can't really kill Judge Death as far as I'm immediately aware. Like the first time they stop him, they have him possess Judge Anderson, throw her in a cube of the miracle plastic, and put her in suspended animation at a judge museum.
Yep.
And then they have to cut her out because Judge Dredd somehow managed to escape, which, if I'm not mistaken, was a crack in the thing and it led to a possession.
Yeah, a guy comes in and creates a crack in the plastic so that Death can escape, because Death's friends, the other dark judges, just showed up following him, and so they make this plan to release him and come together and start killing again.
Yeah.
And they are beautifully designed because Brian Bolland is a monster. Like, again, even before Batman Who Laughs, I remember when they showed the original evil Batman.
Yep.
They had that one that was like a huge guy, and I was like, that is a dark fucking judge, man. That is Judge Fear. I've seen that guy. But yeah, kind of the beauty of also the Dark Judges are that they are these characters that can't be completely killed. You gotta get creative.
Yeah.
Unless you want them to keep coming back.
Yeah, I see exactly who you're talking about. The one who's like an evil blend of Wonder Woman and Batman riding a horse with like bat wings on his helmet. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and he has the same kind of like gate helmet as Judge Fear.
Yeah.
Like, they're not the same character and they're different enough, but also the Dark Judges are way better.
You can say that again.
And also, 2000 AD in general used, even today, they're pretty sparse when it comes to using the Dark Judges. They're not going to be throwing them at you every year. It's always sort of a big deal when they show up.
Yeah. It's been a decade, so we need to kind of jab Judge a little bit harder. Let's go get the Dark Judges.
Yeah. So since you were mentioning Anderson is also a part of the weird shit of Dredd, which is that at some point in the future they discovered that people with psychic abilities were starting to be born. So they quickly rounded them all up and started Psychic Division within the Justice Department, which is a division of precognitive judges, of mind-reading judges, of pyrokinetic judges in some cases.
Pyrokinetic? Like throwing fire and shit?
Yeah, there's a story, a couple of stories about one psychic judge whose psychic power is just burning people up.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and because using psychic powers is so demanding, they're all usually allowed a bit more leniency than your usual judge, because your usual judge is out on the streets like 22 hours a day, barely gets any free time, doesn't get any kind of free time at all in general. They don't have lives outside of Justice Department. They don't get to have families, they can't marry, they can't even have any kind of couples at all. Their lives are just the law, the law, the law. And basically a monastic code.
Yeah.
Psychic Division is allowed a bit more leeway. They're allowed to have a little more fun, but not too much. And so, for example, Judge Dredd is a guy who we've never seen his face. It's always completely using his helmet all the time, and the few times that his face is shown, it's always obscured. Anderson, her very first panel is her without a helmet.
Yep.
So we have Psychic Division there, and eventually Anderson, of course, became a huge breakout star because she's a great character. She's a lot more happy and peppy than Dredd in general. And she's also more heroic. She's a lot more empathic, a lot more touchy-feely at times. So she was one of the first Dredd characters to get her own spin-off. But even within Psychic Division, there are also things like the Exorcist Division, which are, every year we get about 20 or 30 cases of demonic possession. So we have to keep a division of exorcists specifically for that.
What?
And they have like little crosses on their helmets and stuff.
What? This is nuts. I mean, I knew that going in because we're talking about Judge Dredd, but this is nuts.
Yeah.
Just a casual, we get 20 to 30 cases of demonic possession a year. Excuse me?
Look, man, is it any weirder than interdimensional super fiends and stuff? Nah.
It's not that much weirder, I suppose. I'm just giggling because it's like on top of all this crazy shit, it gets so bad that Doom 1995 is basically just a footnote.
Yeah. Like, there have been stories of the actual devil himself showing up and Dredd beating his ass.
Judge Dredd, I am the law, Satan!
Yeah, they're just smacking him in the face and shoving him in an ISO block.
Shoving Satan into an ISO block. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Imagine the disrespect he must be feeling. He's like, I can't believe I got my ass imprisoned by a human!
Yeah. It's beautiful, and it's also written entirely in Limerick for some reason.
Well, again, it wouldn't be a Judge Dredd comic without at least 4 degrees of weird, and I guess they needed that 4th degree, so...
Yeah.
Oh god.
British comics are weird sometimes, man.
That's just true of British media in general. And British media, I find it funny that they were so shocked and appalled that somebody gets shanked with a bayonet in a war story. And yet, fucking Plague Dogs is basically rated E for everyone. Plague Dogs! Or how about Watership Down, or The Animals of Farthing Wood, where you literally see babies impaled on spikes. But oh no, a soldier getting impaled on a bayonet is somehow too far. It must be the fact that they're talking animals. That's the only explanation that makes any sense considering the British.
A mix of that is also a mix of comics at the time were sort of like what video games were in the 90s and the 2000s, which was this massive, explosive, all the kids are reading it, but it was also such a relatively weak sort of media, not in the sense of storytelling or anything, but weak in the sense of it wasn't as deeply entrenched as movies or books. So if you wanted to go, if you were a moral crusader and you wanted to target someone, you would target comics the way they would target video games in the 90s. If you wanted to blame something for the decline of Western civilization, it was the violent comics that were turning kids into criminals.
Which, is kind of hilarious in hindsight, but...
Yeah.
But that's just Judge Dredd, man. Judge Dredd is exactly 3 things. a hard-ass sci-fi Dirty Harry archetype fighting some of the most batshit insane scenarios you've ever seen and keeping a straight face.
Yeah.
So...
There's also stuff. There's also just... Again, a lot of those early stories they had to put them out quickly because, again, this is a weekly anthology. So a lot of them were just, let me just read the papers and see what's going on and then see if we can get away with having fun with some of that. So suddenly it's like, what's popular right now? Game shows. Here's a story about game shows in Dredd, for example, where the game is just come on scene, come behind the cameras and tell us your life story. And if it's sad enough and it makes the people in the audience cry, you get money.
Oh.
Yeah, which was I'm sure was hilarious in like 1981, but nowadays it's like
That's messed up, bruh. Especially when you consider that one game show. I heard about this recently, or game show. Do you remember the story about this like under the radar Japanese comedian who is basically put through the equivalent of televised hell?
No, but I can imagine.
TLDR, this guy wins a contest to basically become constantly live streamed, and his goal is to basically buy his way to freedom by winning sweepstakes. And he is they literally put him in a room with nothing. It's just him, some cameras, and he doesn't even get to keep any clothes. So he has to win sweepstakes for clothes, for food, for whatever he can do. And he is live streamed the whole time. And because once wasn't bad enough, they did it to him 2 more times and then set him up for a third, even though or I guess technically fourth, except this fourth one, he was in a box, and then the box opens up to an adoring crowd of thousands of people, and he had already stripped naked by this point.
Was the nakedness necessary?
For the psychological torture aspect, I suppose. Like the guy behind Moist Critical did a video about this. Let me see if I can link it to you so you can check it out later.
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah, the most evil live stream ever is what Moist Critical calls it. But on his channel, Penguin Zero. But yeah.
Yeah. See, it's kind of like Dredd in a lot of ways is based on a world where human life and humanity in general has become so degraded that it has lost all value, and people just live these kind of nothing lives from start to finish. Like there are caption boxes where they say a man could be born, live and die his entire life within his city block and never leave it. Imagine living your entire life within your building.
Oh, damn.
And nobody cares. In fact, nobody cares to such an extent that when you die in Mega City 1, unless you're very rich or unless you already inherited like a plot or something, you go straight to a certain facility called RESIC. Do you know what they do in RESIC?
Mass cremations?
You wish.
Oh no.
RESIC is called a recycling facility where they put all the corpses into giant machines that rip apart all the useful parts of the body and take them away to be used in products all across the city. And the rest then, the rest gets cremated or turned into paste or something. But there are stories about, these clothes are made from recycled material. The recycled materials are people.
Oh.
And there are stories set within the RESIC facilities, which are these huge like nightmare machines of conveyor belts and hooks and stuff.
Yikes. So let me see if I can kind of get into the ethos for a Judge Dredd writer. Take some modern concept or some new concept, like say the and the advancement of the cops and recycling your waste and all that, and just be like, let's not even crank it up to 11. Let's crank it up to 22.
Yeah, let's take it to what's the worst possible thing that could happen with this,
and then make it worse.
Oh, here's a sense of alienation that comes from living within a big city in a place with few hopes for the future. What's the worst that can happen with that? And you get block wars, and you get these kind of monstrosities.
Block mania, or like, okay, well, recycling's cool. We kind of get it. Let's recycle people for clothes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is nuts. So speaking of the weird shit. Speaking of said weird shit, let's talk about adaptations. Things that Judge Dredd has been involved in that aren't necessarily standalone stories. We're talking like Batman versus Judge Dredd, or the 1995 movie with Sylvester Stallone, the more recent Carl Urban movie, and the Mortal Kombat connection, which, this is the time. Spill it. The hell's going on here?
Okay, let's go there. So in the 90s, around the same time as the movie had just come out, that there was a Judge Dredd movie video game for the Genesis, and I think the Super Nintendo as well.
Yep.
And around the same time, there was also a pitch for a Dredd side-scrolling game made by Midway.
Oh.
And yeah, and you can find videos of the pitch. It never got off the ground. I think they made like a demo of a couple of levels and such. I'm not sure exactly how far they went. But you can find it, and they use the same digitized actor technology as Mortal Kombat.
Oh.
So there's a guy in a dread suit just walking around. And the part of that I always remember is that they have an NPC who's just a woman who is taking her pet for a walk, and the pet is Goro.
Oh.
It's like a tiny little MK1 Goro on a leash.
Because Midway loves their cheeky little references and Easter eggs.
Yeah, it was gonzo as hell. I think there's like a playable build and all.
If you could find that playable build, that would be a very interesting video to kind of break down and talk about. But that might be something.
Yeah, here we go. It's from the early 90s, like 92 as well.
Okay, so this was right when Mortal Kombat was coming out, because the first Mortal Kombat game came out in October of 92, so...
So, before that, there was... As far as adaptations go, the most you've seen in Dredd would be like pen and paper RPGs, and a couple of audio dramas from the 90s.
Like,
made for, like, British radio.
Hold on, so British radio dramas, which I didn't even realize they were still doing radio dramas in the 90s, and almost Dungeons and
they're still doing them now.
Oh, wow. I guess that's what podcasts are now, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Ah, shit. I just realized I went all the way back to the 50s. Crap.
But I'm trying to create a new medium, we ended up reinventing radio.
I mean, the more things change.
But Dredd had always been considered like the crown jewel of 2000 AD, even back in the 80s. They were always like, oh, this is the guy. This is the marketing powerhouse, the merchandising powerhouse.
The face of 2000 AD, which is funny because one of the other stories they did was Flesh, which is apparently still getting reprints as well, because I found feathered critters in Flesh, which Flesh came out in the 80s, I think. So
yeah, Flesh was one of the first 5 2000 AD stories, which is amazing. It's a time-traveling story about how in the far future, in a different far future, there's a food shortage in general across the entire world because everything's shit again. So their solution is to go back in time and use dinosaurs for meat. Like herd them back to the future where they can be slaughtered and sold to people.
Yeah.
So it's cowboys herding triceratops across a prehistoric landscape. And the funniest part of it all is that it's kinda in continuity with Dredd. Sort of.
It's kind of like an offshoot of Dredd?
Kinda. Not really. But to make it easy on you, there is one character from Flesh who shows up in Dread, and it's not one of the humans.
A dinosaur fucking shows up in Mega City 1.
Yeah.
Okay, then. Well, I suppose if you have interdimensional travel, it would make sense to be able to jump timelines, but still. A dinosaur running riot in Mega City 1. That's hilarious.
And of course, this is a dinosaur as seen by British artists in 1977, so it's a trip.
Yeah, that's whew, nutty. And then we also have crossovers to talk about too. Like we mentioned, Batman and Dredd. Oh shit, this is it, huh? Oh, it's the Devil Beast. Oh god.
What's going on?
What am I even looking at here?
You are looking at Satanus the Tyrannosaur.
Satanus the Tyrannosaur. How fucking edgy do you have to get? Holy God! Oh my goodness, that is incredible. I love it. I love it to death. But we also have to talk about crossovers, because I know he crossed over with Batman and the Joker, but has Judge Dredd crossed over with anyone else?
So I was laughing to myself when you said that he crossed over with Archie, and Archie crossed over with the Predator, because Judge Dredd has crossed over with the Predator.
Because of fucking course he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Predator. Who hasn't crossed over with that guy?
What worthy prey would he find in Mega City 1 unless the Predator's literally hunting judges?
Which he totally did. It did not go well for him.
I'm sure he didn't. I'm sure he didn't. Yep, that is a hairy-ass Judge Dredd shanking a Predator after presumably blowing its arm off.
Yeah.
And of course he's shirtless, because we have to make him super edgy and cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was his style at the time. But yeah, as far as crossovers go, there's the Batman crossover, which is also weird because it was such a massive hit that they immediately asked for a sequel. And that sequel took so long to make that they made 2 other crossovers with Batman in the meantime, just to keep the hype going. So there's a total of 4 crossovers with Batman. There's also in the middle, they did a crossover with Lobo. That's amazing.
Because
I love it.
that is the perfect villain for Lobo, for Judge Dredd. You got Judge Dredd, literal order. You've got Lobo, literal chaos. Biker versus cop. Hell's Angel versus cop. Come on, it writes itself.
Yeah, it's literally called Psycho Bikers versus Mutants from Hell. And of course it makes sense because Alan Grant, again, the connecting tissue when it comes to crossovers is Alan Grant, and to a lesser extent John Wagner.
Well, I still get a giggle every time I hear Alan Grant, the comic writer, because he himself was a fictional character in my mind. Alan Grant, the paleontologist. Somebody, Michael Crichton must have been a fan.
Yeah, it's like you have a paleontologist, a nice guy, and then you have this British old punk in a leather jacket, who red, and
this crazy old British anarchist who made Anarchy, Judge Dredd, and Batman. I wonder if he ever wrote anything for Oracle, because that would just cinch it right there.
Oh, you had to check, but yeah, man, Grant, rest in peace. He passed away last year, and that guy was a powerhouse back then.
Rest in peace to that guy, man. Rest in peace to that guy. So
other than that, as far as crossovers go, there was also an earlier, relatively more recent one from the mid-2000s with Aliens. And that one is great because, a lot of crossovers try to make crossovers be something special. They're like, oh, look at this unique once-in-a-lifetime event. But the Aliens crossover happened in the weekly 2000 AD magazine, and it was seen as almost like a regular day for Dredd. It was structured just the same, it was played just the same. There wasn't any, here's a character from Aliens to fight alongside Judge Dredd. It's just Judge Dredd, and he woke up that day and there were aliens in his city.
Okay. So yeah, because crossovers, you kind of want to make it a big deal, but all of a sudden it's just like, for the aliens, it was just like, it's just another Tuesday.
It's not worse than some of the other things he's had to deal with.
No.
And the funniest part is that I also think that Judge Dredd versus Aliens is kind of like Batman versus Judge Dredd, where if someone were to ask me, listen, I want to start doing Judge Dredd, but I have no idea where to start, and I would like something familiar, I would say, yeah, no, just start with that one. It will give you a good idea of how Dredd works.
Right. Which, I love this cover, because, no kidding, it's Judge Dredd, who, by the way, is drawn kind of like Kratos, itty-bitty waist, giant upper body, and he's just like, start talking, creep, to a fucking chest burster. Like, this...
A chest burster covered in blood, so he just burst out of someone's chest.
And he just grabs it. It's like, I'm looking at this, and it's just like, hey, man, what the fuck? This looks like a parody, but it's real, and it's hilarious as a result.
It looks like fan art. It looks like someone you'll find on DeviantArt, but no, there's a whole story in that, and it's awesome.
Which is wonderful.
Apart from that, there's also back when he was with IDW, there was a crossover with Mars Attacks, of all things.
Because, of course.
And that one was also great. It was beautiful. It was drawn by John McCree, who's the guy who's drawn Hitman for DC and a couple of other things. And let me check this. I think it was written by Al Ewing, if I don't...
Al Ewing wrote a Judge Dredd story?
Al Ewing got started writing Judge Dredd.
I was wondering about that, because Al Ewing is relatively new on the scene, isn't he?
Yeah. He's pretty much new for Marvel. That's where he's just stomping real hard. But before that, he got his start in 2000 AD. Because 2000 AD, on top of being like the classic British comic, they also have an open submissions policy. You yourself, right now, can write a 4-page script for a sci-fi original comic with a twist at the end and send it to 2000 AD. Free, completely. You have to pay for it, sure. You have to pay shipping costs, but they will read it and they will send you like a critique, or they will buy it from you. So what that means is that a lot of writers and a lot of artists got their starts in 2000 AD.
Yo, like that is actually...
Garth Ennis got his start in 2000 AD.
That is actually so
Alan
fucking cool. Like,
yeah,
there needs to be more 2000 ADs then, because, like, imagine like how many crazy writing ideas you can get if you have 2 or 3 2000 ADs. You know what I mean? With all the fan submissions, and I didn't even know that was a thing. Making a note to potentially make a thing for, because I'm writing a novel too right now. So you'll like it. Right now it's called Princess of Earth.
I like it. I'm down.
I'll tell you more about it after the cast. Howsomever. Sure. That's super cool. Like, alongside with all the crossovers and everything, you have this open policy, which means, in theory, if you were to kind of give a little nudge and they were able to negotiate, you can have Judge Dredd just cross over with anybody. Fuck it! Judge Dredd crosses over with Godzilla.
Not Godzilla, but there is an early strip where he has to fight the giant robot King Kong.
Oh, he had to... That's something. And then maybe we can actually get that Judge Dredd Mortal Kombat crossover after all, if it doesn't happen in MK12.
For example.
Because they got Rambo and they have RoboCop. They're 2 steps away from getting Sylvester Stallone to play Judge Dredd again. So,
speaking of Mortal Kombat, here's a little panel from a comic from the 90s, from a Judge Dredd comic in the 90s. See if you can spot anything.
Johnny Cage for Sonya Blade. And this was from the 90s?
Yep.
So when I'm
I
here,
would say late 90s.
so somebody got cheeky, slipped that on there, and 20 years later, Johnny Cage has a kid with Sonya.
Judge Dredd predicts the future in more ways than one.
Cassie Cage, your godfather is now Judge Dredd. Good luck. Jesus fucking Murphy, that is hilarious.
So yeah, there was always this feeling of Dredd is the main guy for 2000 AD, but there's always a problem with Dredd, which is that he's their main guy, he's their most valuable property, but he's also super hard to grasp as a character because he's not a hero. He's not a traditional kind of guy. He's not, a cool dude or a rebellious cowboy or not particularly likable. And that's I think that's part of the reason why it took so long to make a movie out of him, and why when that first movie came out, it was like that. Like, a lot of people will tell when we're talking about, 1995, the Stallone Dredd and such. And there's always a lot of things that, well, you got Stallone, you can't have him wearing a helmet and being an asshole the entire movie. But I think it's also a problem of, imagine telling an American audience in the 90s, a worldwide audience in general, this is your hero, you're never gonna see his face. Never at any point.
Yeah.
Even RoboCop had moments where he had to take off his helmet and show his ugly, creepy, bald face. But you had to know that there was still a human under there. So it was always hard, and that's also why I think that the 1995 Judge Dredd movie, which had a really difficult development and went through like 4 or 5 different drafts, one of which had Anderson, the other had the Dark Judges. It was really a pain to get it there. Has this fun thing where the first 10-15 minutes are kind of like a Judge Dredd story, and then halfway through it just turns into the most generic sci-fi pew pew laser gun movie ever.
Which is rather unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate, in fact. Especially since, visually speaking, that movie is fantastic, and it's also pretty close to the comics. A lot of artists from the comics worked in that movie's art direction, and you can see it in the concept art, and you can see it in how it came out in the end.
Yeah.
So it's a shame that it all just disappears after a while.
Yeah, which is kind of... But then you have 2012's Dredd with Carl Urban.
Yeah, 2012's Dredd, which I saw in theaters. I'm so glad I did. It's one of the 2 Blu-rays that I own.
Ah.
And I love that movie deeply, and I love that movie with all my heart, and I just can't stop loving that movie for a very simple reason. First of all, because the first thing you see in the credits, the first name that shows up in massive red letters, is Judge Dredd, created by John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra.
They put the creator credits right up in front.
Yeah. None of this special thanks to, and it's like this tiny little line and like minute 4 of a 4.5 minutes long credit sequence. No. It's just Dredd, boom, in your face. These are the guys. And Wagner himself was on set to offer a sort of consultation, and to rewrite a few lines and say, look, it's like this, like that. And of course, Urban himself is a huge Dredd fan, like a massive Dredd fan. The directors as well, everyone. It's like a little planetary alignment between a lot of people who are all fans, who are all huge fans, but who also understand that you gotta make a few things different. You gotta make things be able to stand by themselves, and you gotta take a whole lot of things into account. Which is why the movie visually is very different from anything, from pretty much almost you see in Dredd. But on one hand, it has its own identity, which I love. And also, the way it adapts a lot of the visual elements still works, still makes sense. I still see it and say, okay, yeah, that's a Dredd. So the 2012 movie to me is just beautiful. They nailed so many. They nailed the important things. They nailed what I think is most important about Dredd, which is some very subtle elements of the characters that I think a lot of adaptations just don't get. Not just for Dredd, but in general. A lot of the adaptations are about the surface aspect, and then they make their own unique takes for the cores of the characters. And those can be bad, and those can be good.
Right.
Dredd, what it does is has its own visual identity. Visually, it does its own unique takes. But once you start poking at the core of Dredd and Anderson, and you start comparing them with the Dredds and Andersons of modern Dredd in particular, you start to see that, okay, no, this was made with a lot of care and with a lot of thought.
Yeah. Which leads me to the question of, if somebody had never heard of Judge Dredd before, and was keen to kind of get a quick primer before they got into the comics, would you recommend Dredd 2012?
Yes. I would recommend it with the caveat of, listen, this was a movie made like 40 years after the comic started. It's gonna be different. There's gonna be some things that are not gonna be the same. But the heart is there. The core is there. And you're gonna walk out of it with an idea of who Dredd is, who Anderson is, and what Mega City 1 is.
Yeah.
You should absolutely watch it. And on top of that, it's an awesome movie in general. Like, it kicks ass.
Oh, totally. Like, it's not even just hey, you should watch this as a good primer. Just watch it because it's watchable.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah.
They made it with like $2, and it still kicks ass.
Speaking of the stories of Mega City 1, let's delve into a couple of those now. In particular, let's talk about the Apocalypse War, because that's my.
Let's talk about arguably the peak of classic Dredd.
Yep, Apocalypse War, and then how about you throw us a curveball for our second one? Because Apocalypse War, that is like the most iconic. And then for a story that is a little out of the blue, just to kind of give the obscure side, and then the side that most fans would be familiar with.
Yeah. So, the Apocalypse War is one of the earliest, what Dredd calls the mega epics, which is because most Dredd are just one shot, or maybe they have 2 or 3 episodes. They're weekly stories, very self-contained, just start, beginning, and done. Usually in like 4 or 5 pages too, because again, weekly anthology is wild.
Yeah.
But every now and then it's like, okay, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna spend the rest of the year on this one story, this one tale, this epic storyline that every strip in 2000 AD had. And the Apocalypse War is one of the most well-remembered ones of them all, because it's beautiful. It's an amazing story. It's beautifully written and gorgeously drawn. And
it features
the basic gist of it is that, well, you've read it already, but just to get the gist of it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's that suddenly one day in Mega City 1, a bunch of blocks start fighting each other, and you get this massive block war of 4 or 5 blocks all shooting at each other, and it just seems like business as usual until another block war sparks on another sector of the city, and then another, and then another, and then another. And suddenly the entire city is fighting each other. Like, everyone is killing each other. There's people starting chemical warfare against each other's. Everything looks insane. And eventually they find that it was all a plan by a spy from East Meg 1, which is the Soviet mega city. It's all part of a plot to start a war against Mega City 1 by weakening its defenses and creating chaos and getting everyone ready for an invasion. And that's when Blockmania, which is the first story, turns into the Apocalypse War. And the Apocalypse War is the story of all the different ways that East Meg 1 starts to invade the city. Turns into a war epic right away, and Dredd fighting back against the invaders and finding a way to eventually defeat them. And here's a spoiler, and I would really urge people to, take a moment. If you're listening to this and you've never read Apocalypse War, please ask you to stop, take a moment, go read that story, and then come back, because it's like everything in Dread, it's worth reading completely unspoiled, because you can never imagine where it's going.
Yeah.
So the end of Apocalypse War is that after thwarting like 3 or 4 different plots, Dredd calls for help to the other mega cities. The Mega City 2, which is on the west coast, and the Texas City, which is in Texas. And they both say, look, Dredd, you're on your own. We're not going to go to war with East Meg. We're going to focus on our defenses first. And then so when they come for us, we'll be ready. And Dredd says, well, we have no weapons. We have very few people. We're losing this war. We need to do something. And something for Dredd is stealing a Soviet spaceship, basically, traveling undercover all the way to East Meg 1, stealing their nukes from one of their bunkers, and then shooting those nukes into East Meg 1, wiping it off the face of the Earth, along with nearly 500 million people. All because that way the Soviets fighting in MC1, Mega City 1, are just gonna give up. Because they don't have a home to fight for anymore.
Yeah, and this is after surviving things like hypnotic posters and the most excruciating torture attempt I've ever seen in a comic.
Yeah, and tanks and robots and smaller nukes.
And
it's insane.
Interdimensional mega nukes. Well, not interdimensional, but it gets beamed to an alternate dimension, which is paradise. Yeah. So Judge Dredd literally blows up paradise.
Yeah, there's a beautiful part where basically Mega City 1 sends their own nukes, and that's when East Meg 1 reveals that they have a dimensional shield, where instead of destroying the nukes, it just sends them over to another dimension. And that other dimension is paradise. It's a beautiful, idyllic world. And you get this double spread of these sort of like hippies sitting under a tree going, oh wow, look, what's that thing that just appeared in the sky? It's kind of pretty. And then double spread of the entire planet just blowing up, just breaking in half over like a ring of nuclear explosions. And those are 2 pages, and then we never see anything about that again in that story. It's just, here's a bit to show you how bad things can get.
It's and how fast they could get bad too. It's the epitome of the one bad day thing that Joker was touting about in The Killing Joke, taken to the nth level. Which it's like, makes me wonder, did Alan Moore ghostwrite this?
We are not fucking around with that thing.
Yeah, I was about to say, did Alan Moore ghostwrite that bit?
No, he was busy writing other things for 2018.
Fair enough. I'm just giggling because it's like, man, talk about going like from sunshines and rainbows to grimdark in fucking less than a page turn.
Yeah.
That does.
And it's also, the other good thing about the Apocalypse War is that it's so perfectly, beautifully paced. It's the rhythm of the story is flawless. The story, Blockmania, starts with a woman getting an ice cream dropped into her face, which is part of what sparks the Block Wars. And then that story ends with Mega City 1 blown to shit. Like half of it is unlivable anymore. And an entire other mega city blown to shit and completely unlivable. It ends with 500 million people dead. And it starts with an ice cream cone. And you can see it grow from one spot to the other.
Yeah.
You can see where it goes from point A to point death.
The epitome of the butterfly effect right there.
Yeah. And it's beautiful and it's amazing and it's a testament to Wagner and Grant who write the shit out of the story. And of course it's also, that's the Esquerra part, which again, 25 chapters, each one 4 to 5 pages, with a lot of double spreads, and Esquerra just draw the living hell out of it. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and right off the bat you can see that this is different. This feels different from other comics. There's a sense of forward momentum, a sense of everything's constantly moving forward, things are happening. We just stopped this one plot. Okay, we gotta keep it moving to the next one.
Yep.
And each one is like a mini story within the bigger story. So you never get that feeling of everything's going too fast. It's going just fast enough to keep you hooked.
Which is where it got so a mite frustrating. Not on the fault. It's not the fault of the book, mind. It's I was stupid enough to read it at work with two 15-minute breaks and a 30-minute break. And I was stupid enough to try and to start reading Blockmania and Apocalypse War. And I would be like, motherfucker, multiple times. I would reach a point where it's like I didn't quite reach the good natural breaking point. So it's like, son of a bitch! I'm gonna be thinking about this all day.
What's gonna happen next? I can't just stop now.
I can't just stop now. There's shit going down. But I had no choice.
Yeah.
It was kind of the same with Tomasi's Nightwing. I just couldn't put that shit down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like, no. I want to keep reading because it never stops. It just doesn't stop. There's always something.
Can't stop, won't stop. That's the goddamn appeal for Judge Dredd. If you want the book equivalent of a 90-minute action flick that just doesn't stop, there you go.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is beautiful about Apocalypse War, and it's also beautiful about Judge Dredd, the second one, Judge Dredd Lives, is that it shows how proactive Dredd can be. Because Dredd is not a guy who will beat up a villain and then let him escape. Dredd is not a guy who will be like, well, we beat them this time, and next time we'll be ready. Dredd is a guy who will fuck you up and make sure you never come back.
Yeah.
He's not just gonna beat you back. He's not gonna defeat you. He's going to destroy you and make sure you can never threaten the city again. So, for example, when we go to Judge Dredd, there's a chapter in Judge Dredd in the second one where the Dark Judges are defeated and they all go back to their home dimension. And in any other comic, the story would end there. We'd be like, well, we send them back home. Maybe someday they'll come back, so we better get ready. Instead, Dredd goes, hey, look, they dropped one of their dimensional thingies. I'm going in to kick their asses. And he goes into his dimension, a dimension he knows nothing about, completely alone except with Anderson as his only backup. And he just jumps right in and goes, this ends now. Right the fuck now.
Yeah. He sees an opportunity to ice these guys, and he's gonna take it.
Absolutely, and that's just so wild and different from any other kind of mainstream comic. It feels so impulsive and harsh and raw.
Yeah.
No, I'm not gonna let you go. You came at me and you missed. Now you're gonna die.
Sounds like lyrics to a fucking Dee Snider song.
Yeah. It's also like, you get the feeling that a lot of characters are tied to their plots. They're slaves to their plot. And Dredd is like, no. I'm taking control now.
I am the plot. I am the plot.
Exactly. It's like, there's a moment where the plot says where the story could end right here, and Dredd says, no, we're gonna have one more episode just because I want to kick this guy's ass. So in that sense, he has a lot of agency, he has a lot of intensity, and that makes him feel more interesting in general than other characters who just sort of stop at a point. This is not a guy who stops.
Does this... this is going to be an odd comparison. Is this part of the reason why you also really like Lady Shiva, at least before they started messing with her?
Kinda. In general, I like characters who take control of their lives a little. Characters who don't just, stand there feeling mopey or bad about their fates or stopping themselves because, I can't do this or else I'd be no better than him. And that kind of stuff. I like characters who take control of their stories.
Right.
And who are able to just say, no, this is my life, and I'm moving forward with it. And yeah. I'm the one pushing the cart here.
Which is one of the main reasons why I really, really, really love Kim Yale. and John Ostrander when they were writing Oracle, because that's literally what they like. Batman Chronicles #5. It's literally Babs saying, "No, fuck this noise."
Yeah, because it's like you have plot-based storytelling and you have character-based storytelling, and in general, I prefer character-based.
Yeah.
Not in the sense of, well, we're going to do an exploration of the character, but in the sense of, no, the character is the one that's driving the story.
Yeah.
The character is the one that's saying, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it.
And
then they do it.
And then they do. And then that's part of the appeal for Questions Shiva, is that she just does shit because she wants to do shit.
Yeah, this is my life, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to see it to the end. Like, I'm not just going to stop midway for no reason. I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it.
The midlife crisis is for losers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quick side tangent. What's the name of that one, like, driver that Shiva's nice to in that story? Do you know?
Not a driver, but there's a demolition worker that she's kind of nice to.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about, though, right?
Yeah, Hal Busby.
What?
Yeah, there's a guy called Hal Busby.
Hal Busby, yeah.
Yeah, who's a demolition worker, and Shiva runs into.
and she at the very least tolerates him.
No, she actually likes him a lot. And how long do you want this tangent to be?
Let's I mean,
Time me. Give me a time. Time me.
Let's see how well you can sum it up then in. Gotta find my clock app. Okay, from when I hit start, you will have 2 minutes. Okay?
Let's go.
Go!
The reason why Lady Shiva likes Hal Busby so much is because Hal Busby is Lady Shiva for buildings. He's a demolition worker who destroys buildings, so then other people can build something better on top of them. Lady Shiva destroys people so that they rebuild themselves into something better. So when she meets him, the first thing she asks is, "Hey, do you like your job?" And he says, "Yeah, I like it quite a lot," because she recognizes that his job is the same thing that she does to people, only he does it to buildings. And the fact that they both like their jobs is something they have in common. So when he says, "Hey, you wanna grab breakfast later?" she happily agrees, not just because he's nice and well-mannered, because he is akin to her. She sees herself in this guy. And that's why that is the only OTP I will ever accept.
Bring on Shivsby.
But yeah, that's question issue 31. Read it.
Yeah. I don't think it's in my giant omnibus, but I will try and track it down because you know what? It leads to a funny idea where it's like, you know what? Fuck David Kane being Cassandra Cain's dad. Make it fucking Hal Busby. Hal Busby is.
But then Cass would just be a normal, happy woman nowadays. It'd just be a completely normal person.
Not if David Kane abducts her.
Yeah, right.
So that would be fun because it would also be like, it'd be like, oh, the goodness of Cass's heart comes from Hal, but it would be a little bit weird. But also at the same time, it's like, well, yeah. All right, so you managed to beat the 2-minute timer. Congratulations. Now let's move on to the final point for the Judge Dredd thing, which is.
So we were talking about epics, and you wanted me to show you.
Yes.
The second one.
Yes, your second one is like your kind of we wanted to get the big one out of the way, and then just pick one out of the hat that you like because it's either super weird or super funny or.
So I can tell you about the one that's kind of the last of the classic Judge Dredd epics, and the last one that was written by Wagner and Grant, which is Oz.
Okay, that works. Kind of the closing out of classic Dredd then, right?
Yeah. Oz is a story of a guy called Chopper, who had been introduced in a couple of earlier stories, who is this kid who's just a normal Mega City 1 kid. He's not a criminal, he's not evil, he's just a kid. And the problem that he does is that he hates authority. He's a rebellious little kid who started out as a graffiti artist, and then once he got caught for that and then released, he ended up as a sky surfer. And he became such a good sky surfer that he almost won like a big world competition that was gonna happen in Mega City 1. And I think he even won that one. Yeah, I think he won that Super Surf. And Oz is the story of the next Super Surf, which is gonna happen in Australia, which has their own Mega City, which is a lot more lenient and happy-go-lucky than Mega City 1. And the whole city is calling for the judges to release Chopper because they want him to participate and because he's become a folk hero for the judges and for Mega City 1 in general. And the judges go, no, he's a creep, always a creep, he's gonna stay there. And eventually Chopper breaks out from an ICQ with the help of a few fanboys, and he makes a trip on his hoverboard all the way from first across the United States, which is now called the Cursed Earth, which is a whole basically Fallout taken to up to 11.
Yeah.
That's the place where dinosaurs roam and mutants kill people and everything's kind of fun. So on his board he travels all the way across the Cursed Earth. He has to skip Mega City 2 because the judges there might catch him. And then he takes that board and flies it all the way across the Pacific to Australia. Bearing a lot of dangers, having a lot of problems, almost ends up killed by a robot cook in a ship.
Oh my
Terrible
god.
place.
That is...
It's an amazing story.
So
As,
Chopper on the run, hey?
yeah. So he finally gets to Australia, barely alive. He gets received as a hero, gets a hero's welcome from everyone who's waiting for him to get on and get in his board and participate. And the moment he's like happy and go lucky, Dredd shows up behind him and cuffs him. And it's like, we're going back to Mega City 1. What?
He's like, I was so close, come on, man!
And that's half the story. Because as it turns out, then the perspective shifts to the judges, where this has nothing to do with Chopper at all. But at one point, suddenly, they were attacked by teleporting judges with crazy uniforms that didn't match anything from any judge in any part of the world. And they started killing other judges. And Dredd barely managed to make it out alive. But he managed to capture one and get like a kill list of judges that they were hunting. And they try to interrogate him and it doesn't quite work and the guy just kills himself. But by the words he's giving them and by some of the other clues, they discover that he's actually also a clone judge created by a rogue Mega City 1 judge called Judd, who had created a plan to make every judge a clone and then make every citizen a clone so they would have a perfect city of perfect citizens. And he got vetoed, so he went rogue, tried to kill the chief judge at the time, had to escape, and was presumed dead in the escape. But actually he managed to move it all the way to Oz, where he has a base of clone judges that are getting ready to strike back at Mega City 1. And Dredd is using Chopper's visit to go into Oz undercover and sort of pretend that he's only there to capture Chopper, but he's actually there investigating Judd and the Judah, which are his clone judges. And this is all the same story again. And then he blows up the Judah's base, which is in Ayers Rock, and he nukes the shit out of it. And then the story goes back to Chopper, who is able to compete, is finally allowed to compete, basically because the Oz judges go, hey Dredd, we know you want to capture this guy, but this is not your jurisdiction, so we're gonna let him participate because we want to see a cool race. And he races. I'm not gonna say you how it ends, but that's kind of the end of the classic Dredd stories for a couple of reasons. First, because it kind of shifts the kind of protagonism between Dredd and Chopper. And Chopper is great as a character because he's not a villain. He's an antagonist to Dredd. Dredd doesn't like him at all. But he's also a nice guy. He's a likable guy. He is a folk hero in every way. And then because at the end of the story, famously, Grant and Wagner were already kind of tired of working together by that point. And sort of the straw that broke the camel's back is that they couldn't decide how it would end. Like Wagner wanted Dredd to let Chopper go because he'd grown to admire the kid. He'd be like, wow, man, you traveled all the way here. Just, okay, fine, go away. And Grant was like, nah, you should just shoot him in the back. Just kill him.
Oh.
Be done with it. And they were like, yeah, I don't think this is working anymore. They still worked together in a couple of things in the 90s, but that was the last time they worked together in Dredd for an epic.
Yeah.
And it's also just a really good story in general.
Noted. So Chopper
really
Chopper
awesome.
does Australia, I guess.
Yeah.
Noted. I'll have to see if maybe I can get lucky and find it some other time. That leads us.
It's like Judge Dredd makes a little bit like a sports movie almost.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Now that leads us to our final topic that is on this list. What's Dredd doing now? The modern age. What, in the year 2023, has Judge Dredd been doing?
Getting old.
Oh.
Because here's the thing about Dredd. Dredd works in real time. Whenever a year happens in the strip, it also passes. Every time we got a year, it's kind of like Hellblazer.
Oh yeah.
A real world year equates a real year within the strip. So Dredd is like right now pushing 70, I think. He's an old dude.
And he's still kicking ass, huh?
Of course, they have medical technology, which means that he can be rejuvenated and kept fighting fit. But there's always this feeling that he knows that he's living on borrowed time. And also, early in the 2000s, he had a very strong crisis of consciousness and started realizing that maybe Mega City 1 could stand to be a little less asshole-ish about a couple of things. So right now, Dredd is stuck in this place where he understands that things need to change. But this is a man who was created to uphold the law and to uphold Justice Department. So he can't bring himself to tear it all down. He's never gonna, become a cool rebel who inspires everyone to rise up and strike back, because he can't. It's not in his system. So a lot of Dredd stories right now are about him realizing that he's old and that he can't really exert any strong changes. But what he can do is find young judges, find good judges, find people who understand the need to fight against terrible monsters and who are able to, punch Judge Death in the face, but who are also a little more compassionate, a little more understanding, who realize that the law isn't perfect and that it needs to change. So what he's doing is he finds these characters and says, hey, I'm going to take you under my wing a little. I'm going to see if you're strong enough to survive. And if you are, I'm going to more or less raise you to become the next generation, to become the kind of judge that I want to leave behind when I inevitably die.
So
Which, of course, he's not going to die because he's the main character of 2018. But it creates this idea of getting everything ready.
Yeah. Setting that up in case the time does come, which almost leads me to think that he's kind of turned into old Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond.
A little bit.
Does he have a Terry McGinnis?
No.
Oh.
He does have like a couple of young people. He even has another Dredd clone, like a slightly younger clone, that is also hanging around.
Ah.
And he has a bunch of other people who are more like the daughter of a democratic terrorist. Because in Mega City 1, instead of since there is no democracy anymore, terrorists define freedom fighting groups that try to blow up buildings for democracy. And that's a whole plot.
Yeah.
And the daughter of one of those ended up in Justice Department for a bunch of story reasons. And she's become one of Dredd's proteges because she understands that things need to get better. Things need to improve. And Dredd's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's go ahead and do it. But apart from that, no, Dredd nowadays is kind of in a bit of a state where there haven't been any great, big, huge epics for a while. it's mostly because on one hand, Wagner stopped writing Dredd regularly years ago. Nowadays, he comes back once or twice a year to make like a short story. Everyone loves it, and then he goes back to being semi-retired. And Dredd is now written by basically a revolving door of writers, and each one is interested in different parts, and each one has their own story and their own supporting cast. So there's no real strong effort to move him forward a lot as a character. Right now, he's just having regular cool stories, but he has softened up a lot. He has become a lot more compassionate in a couple of ways. He's become a bit more human and a bit more likable. He's still an asshole, still a judge, he's still a totalitarian fascist, but he's not going to shoot Chopper in the back anymore.
And that's the real victory.
Everyone softens up when they get old.
Just ask Kratos.
Yeah.
Boy. But that is
Great.
that is every major point on the DreddCast notes that we had to talk about, really. I suppose the only other thing is there any random trivia that you want to close this out with, or?
As far as random trivia goes, I can tell you the story of how Just Red and 2000 AD was bought by a video game company, if you want to hear it.
You're talking about Rebellion, right?
I'm talking about Rebellion, which also ties back into Alien and Predator,
Sure, let's close it out with that.
because it's all connected. So the story, broad strokes, goes that IPC, the original publishers of Med, were first bought by a company called Fleetway, and then later in the 90s by a company called Egmont. And Egmont didn't care about 2000 AD at all, didn't even know more or less what it was. They only bought Fleetway because Fleetway had, at the time, the rights to publish Disney comics. So there was this whole stretch in the 90s post the movie where 2000 AD looked like it was basically going to die. Like, it wasn't getting any new money, it wasn't getting any talent, just sort of languishing there, chasing trends, being sort of... It was still good in a lot of places, but glory days were gone with fire gone. So, enter Rebellion, which is, for those who don't know, a UK-based video game company,
Yeah.
who are mostly famous for making Alien vs. Predator 1, and nowadays the Sniper Elite series of shooters. And Rebellion wanted to make a game of another character from 2000 AD called Strontium Dog. And so they go to Egmont and they say, hey, we want to license this character. And Egmont basically goes like, hey, we have this character, it's ours, whatever, sure. Here's some money, and whatever. This is the money that we want. And Rebellion's like, man, that's too much money. And they start sort of negotiating. And at some point, the heads of Rebellion are like, listen, how much would it cost to just buy Strontium Dog? And just 2000 AD in its entirety. How much would it cost to just buy it? Not license it, just buy it. And Egmont gave them a number, and Rebellion bought 2000 AD. And they bought it in around 2000, actually. Like, the deal was closed in 2000. And they started sort of the stewardship, and after that, they put out a couple of 2000 AD games. They put out Just Red vs. Death, which is an FPS. Kind of okay, it's not really excellent, but it's a really fan-servicey game.
Yeah.
They also put out Rogue Trooper, which is another 2000 AD comic, and that one's excellent. We got a remaster, I think, last year or a couple of years ago, and it's excellent. It's a really good game. And of course, the funny part is that now we're in year 23 of the acquisition.
Yeah.
And they still haven't made a Strontium Dog game.
Well, just goes to show that sometimes you buy something for one thing, you actually buy it for everything else.
Yeah. It's like, never be afraid to just say, hey, how much for the whole thing?
Wish I could try that with DC, but I don't have that kind of money. Hey, Warner Brothers, how much money are you willing to part with DC in its entirety? So the entirety of my asshole. Okay then. Click. But that is the DreddCast. It's very exciting to be doing these once again, and it's always nice to hear back from you once again, Judge. So,
oh man, it's a pleasure. So one last thing that I wanted to mention: if you're listening to this and you haven't read Dredd, the entire series, because it's actually one series, is collected in something called the Judge Dredd Complete Case Files. You can start from Volume 1 if you want. They're super cheap, they're super big because they're black and white comics, so they get printed super cheap. And you can just start from Volume 1. It's a bit weird. Like, get ready, because those are 70s comics, and they get weird.
I think when we warned them about the Satan Tyrannosaur and the literal Judge of Death, I think they might be ready for that.
Yeah, so you gotta get ready for some kind of corny, kind of cheesy thing. So if it gets too much, if you're like, this isn't for me, you can also skip ahead to Volumes 3, which has Judge Death, Volumes 4, which has Judge Death Lives, and another story called the Judge Child Quest, which is like an intergalactic road movie, and it's great. Or just start at Book 5, which has the Apocalypse War.
Indeed.
So don't be afraid to just skip forward. And if you want something even more modern than that, if you're like, yeah, this is all cool and all, but the black and white is really starting to hurt me, you have Judge Dredd Origins, which is a small epic that also explains all the backstory of the judges. And then you start a couple of more stories after that. It's Judge Dredd Tour of Duty, which is an immediate sequel to that. It's great. And you can just sort of start reading from there. It's a pretty recent story. And if all else fails, just read Judge Dredd versus Aliens or Batman versus Judge Dredd. Excellent. Great.
Or watch the 2012 Judge Dredd movie.
Yeah. Or sit down and watch it because it's also excellent and great. Basically, I know it sounds daunting because it's a comic from 1977 that's still being published today. But it's not as hard as it looks. I promise it's super easy to get into, and it's super rewarding.
Indeed. I mean, if I can get into it, anybody can get into it. And that's gonna just about do it for this cast. We'll probably one of these days we'll probably end up doing something else because you know me, I enjoy talking to Judge Dredd, not Judge Dredd, Judge Anon. And I don't know. Maybe we'll do another 6-hour Shiva epic. Who the hell knows?
Who's stopping us? Who can stop us, man?
Nobody can. So don't forget to be awesome, my friends, and we'll see you guys on the other side.